Hi everyone, welcome to the podcast. Today I'm joined by Lucian Cosinschi, who is a real EdTech leader. He has helped many universities to transform their students' learning experiences through innovative pedagogical principles and also educational technology. He was the Chief Experience Designer at Zayed University, Regional Director of Europe at Minerva Schools, and has advised many education technology companies. And most importantly, he is super excited about learning science, learning design, and the whole learning experience and journey. Today, we're going to touch on topics like Bloom's taxonomy, experiential learning, and learning design. Enjoy the episode. Okay. Hi, Lucian. Welcome to the podcast.
Hi there. How are you?
Good, thank you. I'm really excited to have you here. For those who listen, we met Lucian through an education technology accelerator, actually, where we attended in Israel. And yeah, Lucian was one of our mentors in the beginning. And it was such a amazing thing to talk to someone who was just not just about, I don't know, business and selling to higher ed, but also about like deeply interested in learning science and just learning methodologies and how to learn better. So with that, Lucian, can you tell me a bit more about how you first got interested in this area? Like, you know, maybe how you studied in the early days or anything around that.
Oh yeah, I suppose there's a long history that starts in childhood. I grew up in Romanian communist times, and I was young when the revolution happened, and I experienced many reforms in education throughout my years in school and high school and university, and they were, I suppose, not very well done. So they were, changing standards relatively often. Therefore, we talked a lot about them, and their opinions. So a lot of we could see a lot of the cracks. So when after my studies, I was wondering what will I do when I grow up, and what do I want to do in life and contribute to the world, and so on. I thought, well, I have a lot of ideas about education, and this accidental exposure to a lot of discourse in like, what's the point and how should we do it and what's the right approach, and differences between sort of goals and implementations and all of that stuff. So that's how I decided to see if I can make a contribution in this area.
And what was like the first starting point for you? Like, what was the first way of interacting in higher education?
Yeah, I think I started from those moments of wonder, the moments when something clicks in a conversation, in a class, in conversation over lunch with classmates. That moment where like something comes together. And it was often, I suppose, in between a conversation, I'm sure from reading books, but also from like doing something, trying to solve something and looking for a solution. And then suddenly things come together and there's like a network that clicks in place, and now the puzzle is ready and you see the picture and you're like, oh my God, right? So I thought that was super interesting for me to try to put together for my fellow students at the time. So I started doing this as a student, as a, I suppose as a student job of sorts, where maybe also because I wasn't coming from the perspective of a teacher, as someone who had knowledge to impart. I came from the perspective of the peer. And so the idea was for me to look for what is the environment that I need to create around my classmates for us all to have a moment of realizing something important, something interesting. So I think that's kind of how I started into this. And then I saw, so sort of designing these moments I suppose, combination of being quite clear on what you're trying to achieve, being relatively flexible in how you organize it, because real life is complex, but also being very deliberate in how you set up that activity or something to achieve that moment inside every learner. So I think that's kind of how I started into this.
Can you maybe share like specific example of this kind of moment that you described that maybe stood with you in the whole in the years that happened with the students?
Oh, that I made happen, huh? I've I wonder, I think I would have a hard time coming up on the spot with things that for myself, even, like, what are things that, because I think some of these realizations become part of who you are. Like, you suddenly see the world in those new colors. It's like you're missing, a color in your spectrum,
Yeah,
and now you saw it, and then it's hard to unsee it.
exactly. I do have
So I think that's why it's very hard to be like, what was before and what was after, and whether somebody experienced that is hard to say.
it's also very hard to measure, it's my understanding, like, because
Oh yeah.
like one thing I remember from my experience is that when I joined Techstars, like a startup accelerator, and we had to do like 3 months of, not had to do, we had the privilege to do 3 months of like really, really hard work and a lot of content just going your way, talking with a bunch of mentors. And I started to realize the kind of mindset you need to build a startup, the completely different mindset to, I don't know, building a company or building anything else. It's like, you're going through data points, experience, and then just like trying to understand the most about the market. And if someone would have asked me this question, like, what would you do? Then I could maybe like rephrase, like, say it back, like, this is what to do. But that was the moment when I done it for like 3 months, when I realized, yeah, this is a mindset. Like, I now it feels natural to act the way that I could, like, maybe understand or memorize, like, how to do a pitch deck or like all these kind of like practices. But then when I actually went through it and had this realization, yeah, this is how it's done, then it feels much more natural. And that was like a moment of click to me, which I think you explained similarly. And it's super interesting, like how many podcasts I've listened to and how many videos I've learned. But then when you actually do it and you have to do it with a very limited amount of time, it clicked for me, or like it changed my mindset a little bit.
Right. And I think this is part of the complexity of it, that I don't think we can create deliberately a one path that anybody can take to that moment, to that moment where things click in. I think people come from very different perspectives and with different ideas, and it may be that the fifth time you hear it, you really hear it, like that type of moment. And so that's why I think the way I'm thinking of this and the way I'm thinking of all sort of experiential learning that I'm designing is to increase the chances for that moment, rather than, there's only one goal, it's 100% or nothing. My question is, how can I offer multiple paths for anyone to get there again and again, right?
Yeah.
Also, I mean, partly has to do with logistics of how experiential learning works, in the sense of, it's very time consuming. Therefore, you're going to pay attention to practice some of the most important things. So then you can repeat the the most important things from new perspectives again and again and again and again and again to increase transfer, etc.,
Yeah.
etc.
One of the I recently attended a conference of higher education. It was like, I think, Europe's University Summit. And I met someone who was talking about her experience at a lecture. No, sorry, not a lecture, like a whole course. When they, instead of going through the direction of like, let's give the material, let students understand it, then maybe let's do some case studies or practices, they went the completely opposite round, which I think is really, is correlating with what you said with experiential learning, is that they like presented a crisis where inflation like skyrocketed in like a developing country. And the crisis was that, like, there were like maybe shelves without any stuff and like super high prices. And then they went back, they had to like somehow try to manage that crisis, the students, and then they went back to the principles, or like why did inflation and, like, I don't know, interest rates correlate and stuff, and all that. You were like in a position of someone who is controlling the interest rates, and it was just such an amazing thing to see that they had no idea about the principles, but they are already trying out different methods, and it felt like experimenting and finding out what works. So with that in context, how would you describe, if you could, like in just a couple of sentences, or maybe even more, experiential learning in the way that you believe it works?
So I'm connecting here the answer to your earlier question about some experience of something clicking.
Yeah.
With this question. So just a couple of days ago, I went to a talk, and somebody brought up this image of the human as the rider on riding an elephant, where the reason rational mind is the rider, so to say, and the emotional self, the beast of power, actually driving, making the moves, so to say, is the elephant. And of course, it's an idea that I know from probably high school or before, from like Schopenhauer maybe. And I was thinking, how many times do I forget that again and again? So it's like, this is a good example of a way of thinking that I know, I agree with, so to say, like I understand where it comes from, and I see its usefulness, and I still don't apply it as much as I should, and I should do more of this. So when you're describing this experiential learning, I think, like this course that you talked about, I'm like, well, what they did there is address the emotional point of, like, why are we studying this? Why do you want to know, whatever theory? And it's because you have this problem to solve, right? Like, that's kind of what it is. That's connecting, I guess students, especially young students, are always like, what do we learn this? What's the point of learning this? What's the point of learning this? Well, start with the problem you have, and then you'll see the, why. There's the why, is that we have problems that we're trying to solve. Really, that's a lot of the why. And to extend that, to take the next step, there's let me look up this quote by Antoine de Saint-Exupéry. Do you know this? There's a famous quote. So the English version here, I find, is, if you want to build a ship, don't drum up the men to gather wood, divide the work, and give orders. Instead, teach them to yearn for the vast and endless sea. And to me, this is an example of the rider and the elephant there, where, yearning for the sea. If someone is motivated to solve something, to learn something, to make a change, they will find many ways to do it, right? Depending on their level of motivation.
Yeah.
So it's very nice to lead with that and then talk about tools, then do about like, what do I need to do this pitch? Well, really, you just want to talk to people. You want to talk in a way they understand what you're trying to say. And it turns out that this is the common language we built, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But really it starts from the problem of like, you need to talk
Yeah.
and communicate, right?
Exactly. And how would you, going into that more towards like how you work with institutions and how you work with teachers, educators, can you share a bit about your experiences and, first teaching, but then consulting with these institutions, and what kind of work did you do and what kind of outcomes you saw happen?
Yeah, of course. So I work in I am I guess a generalist within a relatively narrow field. So it's a narrow field because I'm trying to connect the dots between the learning experience, what the learners ultimately get to do, and how they get to learn, and the ecosystem that makes that possible. As I mentioned earlier about like how I was approaching designing experiences for my classmates, where as a peer I'm creating this environment for them to experience and hopefully learn things. Have interesting, important learning moments. It's the same way I try to have this. I don't know if holistic approach to an experience where I'm trying to understand the intersection of what the individual learner will see. What are the goals of the program? What are they supposed to do by the end of the program? And what are the tools that need to be in place to support that? So aligning those things means that I need to learn how to speak with professors and teachers, with IT people, product people, and with sales and marketing people who are making the promises and framing the program really in ways that they might not even be aware of. So I think that's how I'm approaching these things, and I work either sort of on a general sort of learner journey type of place where I'm looking for weaknesses in these connecting of the dots, or sort of dive deeper in the program and try to build all the system necessary for it, including the potential other institutional partnerships that are required to make it happen.
In such a niche but generalist role, like when you have to like, to what I understand, you have a program to make better, or like or help make it better. How does learning science, like assessment, which is one of the areas you are experienced in, how does it come there? Because like the first, I don't know, assumption you would have is that you work more on the, I don't know, side of student success and I don't know, maybe grants and motivation. But like, how did you end up also focusing on assessment redesign and all this and just learning science and learning methodologies? Because I know maybe it's just from your own personal interest, or do you see a huge value added to the general program success?
Yeah, so at least to start with, I would use these words like assignment and curriculum, and there are all these words that have very precise meaning for academics in particular, right? So I would say that I'm using these words in a way sort of looser approach. So I am more interested in the principle. So, and the principle in assessments is that I would like to have some visibility into what I'm doing, so to say, right? Ultimately, the way I'm seeing assessments is you're putting something in front of your learners. Wouldn't it be nice to know whether they saw it? What did they think of it? Did they get out of it what you thought they would? Or did they get something completely different and wrong, potentially? And the fact is that we have very little visibility into this.
So rather than looking into like you got, I don't know, 87%, you go much deeper into.
Right. So exactly. I mean, I don't want to see like the idea of seeing, like getting a grade of sorts at the end of a semester course or at the end of the year course it's not useless. There is a point to it, but I can make the experience of assessment a lot more interesting for everyone involved if we can have this visibility earlier so that we can change and adapt what we're doing so we achieve higher overall. Because ultimately the goal is not that grade. Well, that's an intermediary goal, let's say.
Yeah.
Ultimately is that, as a person, I developed in a way, I see new things that I wasn't able to see before. I can do new things that I couldn't do before. I changed significantly as part of learning, and therefore I'm doing things differently.
Yeah, and also like eventually the goal is that you do well in the area that you work in, and then
right.
Just the other day I had the chance to meet with the dean of a faculty in veterinary medicine, and he said when we talked about like assessment redesign stuff, he said that he hates grades. He needs to use them, but he hates them. And he says that he sees so much difference between a student A who might have gotten an A on their course, like 1 year course, and someone who might have gotten a C. But that student who got a C did some, I don't know, project based, or in Hungary we call it TDK, which is like scientific student conference, or like kind of like they're doing their own research, and then they race each other or like compete with each other who did the best research. And like what's really exciting is that even though he's using assessment because he kind of has to, and that's the formal way, but he's looking into so many other things as well of how can we actually get students not just to focus on a grade, but focus on the all the materials you need to gather, or the knowledge you need to gather, and all the tools and everything else you need to gather to be able to work well in your area. So how do you, when you do work with these institutions, what kind of can you share some practical things that you believe should be implemented, or some clear action points? If someone as an educator is listening to this, what can you do to not just rely on grade-based assessment?
Maybe one thing that I could distinguish there is, I suppose, what people call low stakes versus high stakes assessments, right? Like there are some grades that, for certain reasons, we need summative at the end of the semester, whatever, like all of those. But at least in theory, nobody stops us from using lower stakes assessments daily. Ultimately, what you guys are building is continuous low stake assessment. Like the difference between assessment and learning is not necessarily as big as people make it. Let's put it this way. And this is kind of where woo-woo comes in. So what I would say is, depends who you are in the ecosystem that the educational or the professional learning ecosystem is. It's as we know, these things are complex, and there are some levers that different people with different roles have in the system. But I would say there is something to do to improve at any level, to improve sort of learning outcomes. And I am definitely not the biggest fan of grades. I grew up in Eastern Europe, so I think we were positively suspicious of good grades. So because probably it meant that you were too nice to the authorities.
Or too close.
Yeah, exactly. So, whereas we have this value of knowledge for knowledge's sake of some sort, right? Like that's kind of how I grew up. And the point is that we are, the way our minds work, et cetera, we get very focused on grades. There are plenty of studies in literature about how feedback given after you give the grade to a kid is useless. So, and often, even if you give it before, if it shows up soon enough, basically the feedback does not have the impact you'd want anymore, because we anchor on the grade. So then the question is, okay, it comes with a huge power, right? Because the grade is like a really big stick for learners. But then, because of how narrowly focused it is, it potentially damages the learning process. So there's a lot that we can do about it. And I think I'm reluctant to sort of have a solution for anyone or everyone, because I think there are a lot of things that we can do at many levels to make it that much better. And it would depend on the specific environment. So I can give you examples of environments where students are very motivated versus students who are not motivated. They're not coming from, so, and then you can have, technically opposing strategies, because if the students are very motivated to get good grades, then what you can do is try to diffuse their interest in good grades and sort of promote the overall learning, the things that are harder to measure maybe. And right, like that type of stuff. Whereas for students who are less motivated, maybe this is the one thing that you have that you can try to get them, with grades and so on, to sort of start building that extrinsic motivation if intrinsic is not available, so to say. So that's why I think it's hard to give like an overall thing, but there's no doubt that we can do better, in theory at least. In practice, I think is tough. Dylan William is a researcher I'm following a lot, and he makes this point that often what teachers have to do, and the reason it's so hard to make change in educational systems, is that you have to replace something that is good with something that is better. And that is a much harder change to make, because change is inherently disruptive. And so a lot of effort and not a guaranteed payoff. So when you are overwhelmed with work already, it's very hard to pull that off, right? So where you're not sure of the game. So
like, kind of like one of the ways I look at it, because it comes up a lot in our area as well, is that even if something works better, that okay or good solution is so well polished amongst the years that when you introduce something new and it's disruptive, short term, it might come from a lower, it might have a lot more
Yes.
potential, but it might come from a
Yes.
lower background. So
Yes.
that's why one of the reasons I think this conversation could be super interesting is that how do you view those, like, implementing new assessment and new theories that are not so disruptive but can provide quite a big boost in just general learning outcomes. And one of the things you mentioned when we talked a couple of weeks ago is Hinge questions. So can you talk a bit about that area and how does it support this kind of theory?
Yeah, so I think this is taking that idea of assessment as a spotlight onto what the learner does to a next level, because you're trying to understand more precisely what does it mean for a learner to choose a particular answer, to say a particular thing. So Hinge questions, I think, are very interesting in this, and they require a lot of work, actually, because part of the requirement is to understand what might be misunderstandings that learners often have. So imagine a multiple choice question where you are asking students to choose among, let's say, 4 answers, one of which is correct. But then you have different degrees of how wrong the others are, including ways that learners often misunderstand the material. So a Hinge question, I mean, ultimately a Hinge question is this moment in a lesson plan, let's say, where you can make a decision as a teacher. Do I go left or right? Do I stay in this material longer? Do they need a higher challenge? Right? We're trying to maintain a certain level of challenge with students between boredom and overwhelmed, right? So there's that Goldilocks. And the Hinge question tries to very quickly diagnose the entire class, the entire group of learners very precisely, right? Because imagine for any of the A, B, C, D answers, you have a very clear idea of where learners are. Do they need to learn that material again, as in they have no clue what they're talking about? Is there a very justified misunderstanding based on what they knew before, let's say, right? Like they're making the wrong analogy, for example, but they're very close to the right thing, etc., right? Like, so that would give you a very precise idea of what you should do next. And that will take, Dylan Williams describes this as, it takes you like 30 seconds, and you can see by people raising their hand or showing 1, 2, or 3, or 4, like that, you can get the pulse of the class instantaneously. And this is all captured in that Hinge question, because you know the material so well, the group that is in front of you so well, that you can make very clear decisions there.
And so you think about these Hinge questions as something you should do regularly throughout, like after like every topic you touched, or after every even subtopic, or it's more for each individual information you give. So like maybe after every, I'm trying to make it as practical as it possible. Let's say you have a lecture of like 45 minutes and you present one presentation with 50 slides. Should you do it after every slide, or should you do it after just the end of the lesson, or should you do it like every 5-10 slides where you cover the topic? Or like what is the right way to Because I guess it's not that like trivial. Like, when should I ask these questions? Is it the more the merrier, or is there like a good balance with this kind of focus?
I would say it's hard to say. I'm tempted to say that the more the merrier. Like, the more we find out where learners are, the better we are at deciding what to do next.
Yeah.
But that will be very different from like in different settings. So if I am leading a class, let's say, I cannot process a lot, both because I don't have a lot of time before to prepare this Hinge. Maybe I just don't know, like, I don't know the audience from the like very well.
Yeah.
Like, this idea of like the way I just described Hinge questions works if you are teaching the same group of people. So you know a lot about where they might be coming from and how they might be slightly right while being wrong, so to say, right?
Yeah.
So then you can give them the right level of incentive. So I think it's just very hard. You need very precise understanding of the group and the material to be able to do that, and then to be able to sort of change direction in the session itself. However, I would say sort of taking the level a little bit lower from how I just described Hinge questions, ultimately the moving back to that idea of, do we know what the learner thinks? You know, so I started a few months ago to work with a 6-year-old. Just I'm volunteering to just spending some time with them, and so it's interesting to see and to try to see how they're thinking. So I know, or I have an idea, I form a hypothesis as to what could I put in front of them so they have like a realization, right? So it's like 6-year-old, it's fantastic age, because they're growing very fast, like visibly from like week to week. I see the differences, and there are many times I'm trying to ask questions, and I noticed this thing that annoyed me with my teachers when I was a kid, when they were like, say out loud, think out loud, you know, like that expression. I hated it as a kid. I was like, what are you talking about? I'm just trying to read, and you make me like read out loud. Why? And now I'm doing the same, because I'm trying to understand how he thinks, you know, when he's going through 2 plus what number equals 8, right? And I want to know, what is he thinking? Because it's not just about the number that he puts there, but also about, is he counting like 2 plus 1, 2, 3 until 10? Or is it 10 minus 2? That's how he, right? Like, all of those make a difference, and then help me understand what he's doing. So in a way, they're like smaller. I mean, I'm doing it's a one-on-one, so it's a luxurious environment to be in. But there are many times where I have a hard time understanding why he didn't know now when he knew a thing that seemed very similar to me just a few minutes ago.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking, what is a good question for me to ask, so I understand what the misunderstanding is, and so on and so forth. So I think it's just hard to do.
And that's why, like you mentioned, it looks like it's such a good place to be in when you work directly with someone. And that's kind of what you lose when you expand the class to tens, hundreds, thousands sometimes.
Yes.
And that's why Hinge questions could be so...
Absolutely. Yeah. So, and the advantage, so you're losing the personal touch, right? Like, I'm building in the sessions that we have, I'm tuning every second, where we're going by his answers, right? So, and ideally, this could be done. But of course, in a class of bigger than that, like when I'm leading bigger sessions, it's very hard to do that. I don't have the brain power, right?
Yeah.
The advantage, however, of having online systems is that you can pre-think all of this. So you can do the design work, the understanding work, so to say, before. And as the system expands, you start understanding kind of how it works. And maybe not as a human, but the system does, so to say, right? This is, to some degree, is almost like the A/B testing in like online world, right? It's a little bit like that. Obviously, very different, more precise, more nuanced. Yeah. Anyway.
And going a bit back from Hinge questions to a previous concept in terms of like I guess logical assessment. Like I know one of your you are a big believer, or maybe that's not the right word, or like you use it a lot, the concept of Bloom's taxonomy. So can you walk us through a bit about how it works? What is the general idea behind, and what are some limitations you have seen recently, and how you think about those limitations when we talk about Bloom's taxonomy?
Yeah, this is one of these, maybe I'll call it a theory, that I found quite useful in my work. So first I'll talk about like how my goal in sort of using this tool is not so much as a scientifically accurate, does it reflect, some sort of inherent reality in terms of how like cognitive processes or human learning works, all of that stuff, right? There are other people who care a lot about that. I discovered it when I was interested in connecting academic knowledge to applications in the real world. So I had this model that, you either know something and then you get a good grade, or you don't know and you get a bad grade. And then when I was designing, I was trying to design activities, scaffold things so that learners can grow into doing something. I started wondering, like, what's in between, so to say, like, because I noticed that very, very early on that great, A students in Romania would be 10. We have a 10.
Yeah.
So 10 students who get like the highest grades were less able than students with lower grades to apply those things that they supposedly knew in real world settings. And I was like, okay, so there must be some gap, clearly, right? Like,
did I understand that well? Like, you saw that high grade students were less able to apply?
Yes. That surprised me, right? So that surprised me. That told me, well, several things, right? On the one hand, that high grade does not necessarily really reflect what you can do with that knowledge. It might reflect, your answers to those questions, maybe your memory, depending on what that test actually tests. I noticed that it does not match nicely to reality, right? Like when I would bring these groups of students to apply things on real world projects, it wasn't the case that the highest grade students were the highest performers. So I was thinking, that's interesting. how could it be? And I came across Bloom's taxonomy. I'm not sure what was the context, but I needed something to help me guide through potential steps towards mastery, towards actually mastery. And to me at the time, what was interesting in particular was this idea of connecting academic expertise, let's say, to real world expertise, actually getting to do interesting things. Now, Bloom's taxonomy, the part that we're talking about right now is like there's a cognitive sort of type, and there are like two other types, affective and psychomotoric. I think they're like those all have other purposes, but for this setting, we're talking only about the cognitive one. And I think what I found useful there, how I found it useful as a tool, is that it gave me some idea of where to look if I'm stuck, really, as a designer. So for people who haven't seen this before, Bloom's taxonomy appeared in like 1956. Was created by psychologists, and is often represented as a pyramid, on the idea that at the bottom there are more sort of foundational levels, and at the top are a sort of higher order levels. So the initial idea, as far as I understand, is that you had to ensure, like with stairs, you have to step on each rung of the ladder to get all the way to the top. And it starts with remember. We can put a picture of it. It starts with remember. The next level is understand. The level after that is apply. Then it's analyze, evaluate, and create, right? So, and there are particular things that are associated with this way of structuring a learning scale, let's say. So remembering, it's all about like recalling facts and basic concepts. So the example here would be something like, what is the year where something happened, right? Like if you think you need that type of information, then that's one way to go about it. Understand maybe more about explaining something. You read the definition, you read some examples of it, and now close the book and try to explain how that works with your own words. Right? This is all. It ties into the science of learning, sort of newer developments in the science of learning. In that, what you're trying to do ultimately is integrate something new in what you already know. So that's part of understand. And then the next level is apply. The idea is, can you use what you learn supposedly in a new situation? So maybe you learned an algorithm. Can you now take it from that situation where you learned it and move it in like another setting? Then is analyze. We're trying to draw connections among ideas. Evaluate is try to justify, maybe argue, defend, right? Like defend a position would be an example of that. And then you see where to evaluate something or to defend something, like you can imagine being the advocate for some position in politics, you will have to remember facts. You'll have to have an idea about how certain facts connect to create some sort of a system, how these things apply in reality, how they compare with other ideas that might be less useful than the ones you have, etc., right? You see this idea of a pyramid. And the top of the pyramid in the initial version of Bloom's taxonomy is create. So the idea is to produce new and original work. That's sort of the generic definition. So that's the tool that I discovered, I don't know, 20 some years ago. I believe it had a renewal. People rethought through what these levels should be. There was a lot of criticism about how learning in reality is not this linear, is not this directional. It doesn't necessarily start with remember. There are many other ideas coming into play. However, with all of those limitations, so there were and some alterations that people did in the last 20 years or so to this model, I find it quite useful in identifying more precisely where you are.
Yeah.
So a little bit of what I was calling it often is like a GPS.
That's a really good way to put it now I think about it, yes.
I think it's a GPS for learning, right? You're trying to go somewhere and, you know, you don't always know where you are. And this thing, whether it's true or not, gives you at every level of the pyramid of the system something to practice on. Learning is very hard. And we talked about this before. I think we know relatively little about how learning works. That said, we know a lot more than what we are actually implementing. So there's a weird thing right there. But what I think Bloom's taxonomy gave me is this this way to diagnose a little bit like the Hinge questions, where a learner is, whether the learner is me or somebody out there. The idea being that I can sort of go through a series of sort of types of questions, types of exercises, as an individual, as a group, at these different levels. And whether they match or not perfectly on some real cognitive map is less interesting, but I know it does help. It helps unstuck people. To me, that was very important.
One of the ways that I interpret Bloom's taxonomy in my work and actually in my studies is that, so there are these levels or the pyramids, steps in the pyramid, but for me the essence of it is that you're able to recall stuff, you're able to think about information and knowledge in multiple levels, and you don't have to necessarily like take into consideration all levels, especially when I think it's subject specific as well. For example, anatomy or biochemistry, I'm not able to create new stuff in that, but I'm able to first just recall a single piece of information, and then in the next step, I'm able to maybe understand at the level that I explain it to someone else. I use my own ideas, and I'm not strictly relying on my ability to recall something. And that's what I really believe in, is that when I was a medical student and when I was studying those pretty hard subjects, what really helped me is when I got to the level that I actually now know everything, because I use my own systems to identify that, yeah, I know I am able to answer a lot of these questions. And then I started thinking about, okay, how does this apply in these scenarios, and how can I connect between I will give you a practical example. First I learned all the muscles in the upper arm or like in the arm, and then I learn all the muscles, their innervations and their origin and everything in the leg as well. And then I found the similarities between those two, kind of like interleaving them. But the main idea was I was thinking about the concept that I first remembered in a completely new level, which might not even be in the understand or the analyze or the apply pyramid, but it was on another level for sure, in a higher level of cognitive understanding.
Yes.
And this is what really stuck with me since, is that if you're able to say back to me the definition of osmosis, it not necessarily means that I shouldn't ask you what happens if you put, I don't know, from a low concentration liquid to a high concentration liquid, and you connect those two with like a piece of yarn. What is happening? And you can say back the definition, water running through one or the other, but I have no idea what's happening. And you know, and that's like kind of the guidance it gives you. And I love the way you put GPS, because it gives you the idea of where you are in the understanding. And there might not be you might not need to go a higher level just yet. Like to the highest levels, like you don't have to create a new osmosis stuff, but you need to know the essence of how it works. So that's why it really stuck with me since, because it gives you a really good understanding of where a learner are and where you are at as a learner, I think, as well.
Yes, I completely agree. I think there is this and again, I'm not a scientist. What I care about is doing my job a little bit better. And part of that is trying to understand better where learners are, where the audience is, so to say.
Yeah.
So I can help them move along, right? And move along in this space. So of course, Bloom's taxonomy, I think it's a relatively easy to understand model to start with, but it helped me develop my own dimensions, right? Because ultimately, it's not very clear necessarily, you know, what's Bloom's taxonomy for every sort of age group or for every specialty, et cetera, et cetera. But I think, as you clearly described there, we know that there are other ways of knowing the exact same thing that I thought I already knew, kind of thing. So the question is what those might be.
Yeah.
And what I think is very important to say, that it helped me as a designer of learning experiences, but also it helped me as a learner. So I think this is maybe one thing that is underappreciated, is that when learners become aware of a system like this, where they can self-diagnose, they both see the use of this. So in other words, they are less focused on the grade and more focused on, am I at this level or at this level, so to say, right? Like you gave them a richer space to play in. And then you give them a richer environment at every level, right? Like if we are talking analysis, then you start getting more context and try to figure out what that is. And again, as I mentioned before, I started this from like experiential learning and trying to get experiential learning to be more systematic and more deliberately designed. And to do that, it meant that I do need to be flexible, but also I want to have particular ideas about how this experience goes. So I imagine maybe a good analogy would be that of a director, like we're trying to move the camera, and therefore the viewer's attention through different spaces in different narratives, etc., etc. And so we if you set that up in a particular way, of course people will not pay attention for a second, go have a drink, whatever it is, but you get to catch them again and again, so to say, in that story. So I think it helped me create a much richer, more flexible environment. And maybe this is, I suppose, a very significant drawback that I think is important to mention here, to not take this system as any sort of a checklist. I think often tools become the thing that we live by. So you must get this and this and this and this and this to go to the next level, and that's just not true. That's not true for everyone. It's not true in all contexts, etc., etc. So I think that's important to use it loosely as a diagnostic tool, as a GPS, but it doesn't mean that you know precisely where it is. This is where I suppose the GPS metaphor breaks down a bit, because GPS is more precise. I think in learning, I'm looking for a bit more precision, but that doesn't mean that the space is fixed or clear, right? Like arguably on GPS, a certain coordinate is just in that one place. Well, with humans, this is a lot harder to do, right? Humans would give different answers to the same questions, depending on the day you're asking. They would misapply, they're tired, they're like, a lot of things go on, so it's harder to be that precise. That said, there's still a richness of potential in using a tool like that, and people can develop their own. People can. I think it's just easier to build on something existing, also as a common language for everyone.
Exactly.
But I think that's the important piece. Yeah.
Well, maybe another metaphor could be like almost like a compass, like or like you open your phone and it shows you the location. It's kind of like what I'm saying is I don't necessarily know which way should I go exactly after but I understand, like, hey, I'm not in this level yet. Maybe I should reassess or jump to the next one. So yeah, one thing I would love to ask, building upon the fact that you said that you don't necessarily have to go on a linear basis moving up your way in the pyramid. There is quite a big, I would say, critique or ideas going around right now, where with AI and with just like 21st century, the power of knowledge, or the power of factual and conceptual knowledge, is not necessarily as important, or some would say it's not important at all in today's world. And what's important is critical thinking and I don't know, how to think more structurally, and all those more softer skills and hard skills, and knowledge is not important as much. Would you argue with that, or would you generally agree? And if yes, on what level? And if not, why not?
I guess again, as a non-specialist and somewhat pragmatic into what I'm trying to do, I think it's true that there is often this conversation is maybe academic as opposed to practical. I think I understand what people are debating, but I'm not sure the debate is super interesting in terms of outcomes. So I would say this: for example, is it crucial to know that Bloom's taxonomy exists for you want to learn better? I would say, not necessarily this tool, but I would say knowing a tool like this can help sort of self-regulation, metacognitive aspects that will ultimately result in better learning. So I think, I don't know if there is an essential conversation, because I think often what happens in reality, especially these days, about like what's a fact, right? Like what's a fact, and how do we carve reality? And we are carving reality in a particular way when we are proposing a fact, right? It's very true that we can organize reality in all sorts of different ways, and I think part of what is incredibly powerful for humans is that we can agree on a new system of organizing reality, so to say, where former facts are not facts anymore, right? Like very few people believe now that kings represent the divine will, right? Whereas this used to be a fact, right? Where people died when they sort of denied it. So, right? So we are able to change things like this. So I wouldn't, I would say that it's very hard to build anything interesting without knowing the details, so facts, in the previous system, let's say. I think the way sort of evolutions, revolutions, innovations happen on the basis of connecting in some corner of the current system and showing a 10x improvement on something.
Yeah.
Right? That improvement that will make people go past the pain, the discomfort of changing, to adopt the new behavior, the new belief, the new way of doing things.
Exactly.
So I think it's very hard to say, like, I would definitely not be the one to say
we don't need facts.
Don't matter, or memory. I think there are essential things, and I think the way I'm seeing learning is if you're learning things that don't have an impact in your life, you're probably not quite doing learning. Yeah. I would like to say that even if things are very hard to measure, I rewatched on the weekend a Russian director that was a favorite of mine, sort of growing up, Tarkovsky. I watched one of his movies, Ivan's Childhood, and it's so beautiful, and I'm not sure how that changed my life. I'm not sure what's the usefulness. Like, I'm not sure I will be better at my job directly and traceably because I watched that movie. But I do want to say that movie changed my life in a way. I am looking at things in a different way, and I might forget, and it may be harder to trace for any system still. Maybe at some point there will be enough data about me to trace it down to like one movie that I'm watching. What I would say is that there is a difference. I am seeing now, after the weekend, after watching that movie, I'm seeing life in a different way. And it colors, to go back to the metaphor that we used at the beginning, when I couldn't come up with like a good moment where things click in place. Now I have a new pair of glasses that includes the shade that was left by that movie. And I may forget about it, but it's still there.
One of the reasons why I asked this question, first of all, I'm a big advocate for the opposite, which is that memory, facts, content, knowledge do matter. And it's not just about looking it up in the 21st century. But the second thing is because I think there is a great, or I do see a good correlation between Bloom's taxonomy and this idea. And in a way that I know it's not necessarily the way, but the pyramid shows that you have the remember layer as something which is bigger, and more it has more stuff in it. And then as you
Right.
go up the ladder or the pyramid, you have like a smaller piece, but much more depth of knowledge. And to build up on one of your other ideas, or what you said, is this kind of click, or like moment of clicking, things click together. So how I view this is that if I'm not able to recall historical data or facts, or historical people and events that happened, and connections in those events that happened, and I haven't studied it yet, I'm not able to do any of the higher cognitive level stuff, because I don't have that information in my head, that yeah, I am able to reason with that. So when for example, I'll give two very specific examples. One of them is I love to listen to, in my free time, to historians. I'm not a big fan of history. Like I wasn't like so good in school, but the amount of analogies they can bring to modern life from their experiences is just crazy. And it's not because they are able to critically think super well. They are, but it's also because they have learned so much that those examples have structured their thinking. So when someone is talking about, you don't have to know all the ex-presidents of the United States in order, of course, not necessarily, but to identify like the major events that formed something, and to bring analogies, you need to know those stuff. And looking it up in ChatGPT or looking it up in Google does not help you think. It helps you identify something, and helps you answer maybe a specific question, but not necessarily to help you think. And the other example is I think even more like close to the daily lives of people, is I also love to listen to economists in the modern world. And when they talk about interest rates, inflation, and all these kind of, not, maybe inflation is something that everyone knows, but like how interest rates correlate with national debt and stuff, it's just not trivial. And you have to first learn it, understand it, and then you are able to listen to this higher level of thinking. So that's why I'm a huge advocate of that. And just in the other episode of this podcast, Cindy has said an amazing research about this, which since then I love to tell people, is about chess masters, and how people who had no idea about chess, and how people who have been chess masters needed to look at a table of chess pieces, or elements, and they needed to recall the exact way they were presented, or like where the exact elements were. And then chess masters did much better. And it feels like, of course, but when you think about why, it's not trivial. The why is because they saw the patterns. Like it's just memories. Like quick, like are we able to? And that's what one of the ways that they prove that, yeah, having a deeper knowledge of something is actually helping you to know and remember and react to these new events. And I see a great correlation from that to something like, I don't know, looking at a map of the New York subway line, right? Again, if you don't have any information about like what is Manhattan, for example, it's not gonna make you any sense. You're not able to look at it. But if you do have those pre-existing knowledge and information, then you're able to think about this very simple stuff, and I understand it in a much, much better way. So yeah, again, moving from Bloom's taxonomy and all these ideas into this picture of factual versus conceptual, I think it's really interesting, and I'm a big advocate of, you need to learn stuff, but you need to learn them in a way that you're not just remembering facts, you are remembering correlations and knowledge, conceptual knowledge.
Yeah. So yeah, I think that's a good way to put it, because to me, a lot of this debate probably comes from the fact that we are often stressing one or the other. So I think that's part of the challenge is when we, if you look at educational systems, even when they say they are, I've just read a study recently, when they say they know they need to test higher order skills. They don't. They still do remember the basic ones, which is why I think people are like, no, we should focus on this. Well, because this one will build the need for facts and so on and so forth. So it's not like you can do critical thinking without having facts about a domain.
Exactly.
Like, it's meaningless to say that. While the other group says, well, what's the point of starting with critical thinking when you don't know the facts? So, we should do that. And I think I don't like, the fact is, ultimately, you need to get to both, because one without the other is useless, let's say. And I think what you said is very important, that that goals matter a lot. Like and this is why it's very important to set sort of clear goals of what we're trying to do ultimately, and then the question becomes maybe political, of like, what should educational systems, universities, high schools, etc., what's the level that they should reach? Because my guess is that we would not necessarily agree politically of the goals of those institutions, right? So, and I think that's a political conversations, like, where do we want to be? And then I think is the next level of actually executing on that.
Yeah.
And, do you need to know, how to read, I don't know, chemistry formulas, or you're mentioning the chess example. I think I remember reading an example study like that, and I think the super interesting part was that experts were really good at remembering and understanding chessboards sort of instantaneously, only if they made sense, as in,
yes,
when they randomly arranged pieces on the table, the experts, the masters, and the beginners were as bad at recognizing them. And to me, it's a lot like learning a language, right? Where at the beginning, you just hear like a scrambled noise, and then slowly it becomes normal. And at some point, as a native speaker, you recognize slight changes, a slight grammar mistakes, slight accent mistakes, etc., etc. That's because you are an expert use of that language. Whereas, if you'd as a beginner or as a practicing person, you don't get all of that. And the part of the expertise is that you internalized an enormous amount that you're not really able to express, right? Like, you don't know why it sounds grammatically weird to say that often, right? You can't articulate it, but maybe you learned it at some point. Maybe you didn't even learn it, you just know it, right? That's very different, and that comes from a lot of practice.
Exactly.
So speaking of, like, it's a weird conversation. I'm not sure what's the use of it. I'm sort of staying out of it, because I think what's interesting is the whole connection. You need all of those things. And I think when you start trying to diagnose what's the level that we want the learner to get to, what should they be able to do at the end of this session, at the end of this semester. And then as we have a lot of spotlights into what they're actually doing, And, do we agree on whether those spotlights, be it grades or whatever it is, reflect what they're supposed to reflect, etc., etc. Only when we have those things figured out, we're able to even start having conversations about this,
Yeah.
right? Like, and to me, that's more interesting things, and the rest I'm using as a loose organization tool, and I'm very sort of optimistic with a lot of the sort of digital tools that I see come up, where I think the tools are used to enhance what teachers, professors do, what learners can do in the direction of science of learning and all of that stuff. So I think that's all very important. In addition to all the conversation about what's the purpose of this all, why are we doing learning and so on.
Yeah. Maybe changing the topic to one of the last things that I want to touch on is we briefly talked about when we were talking about Bloom's taxonomy and Hinge questions, we briefly talked about designing multiple choice questions in a way that one answer is correct, but the next is maybe not as correct, but also like it gives you an idea of where the student went wrong. And I know that you had done a bit of work around the designing multiple choice questions, which is just such. I might be a super big geek about this, but when we talk about multiple choice questions, it's like it feels like the easiest thing to do. But then when I'm also in the area of like doing it almost every day for our clients and like I'm coming up with new processes and creating better ones, it's so hard to make them challenging, but not and not in challenging, but actually to encourage learning with a multiple choice question rather than strictly sticking to testing, if that makes sense.
Yes.
And the end of the day, when we talked about low stake continuous assessment, we want to encourage learning and almost want to completely discredit testing, because testing is for maybe end of semester, get a grade or something.
Right.
But the whole idea, and how do you, if you want to talk a bit more about how do you think about multiple choice questions, what are some practices that are like really good, and what are some practices that shouldn't be done as an educator?
So the context of this is during COVID. I was asked to talk to some teachers about like how might they use the newly tools that they were forced into, like Zoom, etc., for more engaged classes. And one of the parts was about like how might you diagnose, sort of use Bloom's taxonomy as like a diagnostic tool. And then I was curious and sort of research a lot about how far can you go in using multiple choice questions as questions where the effort of answering and the effort of correcting from the teacher side can be very low in the moment, so that you get a lot of work, like cognitive work, from the learner side, right? So the way people usually use multiple choice question is for like the lower levels of the Bloom's taxonomy. So that's why I was another context I was using Bloom's taxonomy for. And the idea is like, do you remember, whatever dates or whatever, definition or something like that. So, and of course, that's pretty clear. Everybody can imagine multiple choice question like this. But I have developed for this group and with this group eventually a process by which we realize that you can ask multiple choice questions all the way up the pyramid, so to say. So I don't know about create. Maybe that's too far to go. Although, because it just becomes very arguable how you carve that piece. But the point is higher levels. And how would you do this is actually a lot comes from medical literature, is you have to evaluate, you create a scenario instead of, having the question be, one line and like a few words of every answer. You can have a whole story that is the body of the question, where you describe the symptoms, right? And then you ask, what is the tests that you'll do to find out the answer? What is the likely answer? Where, out of the 4 options you give, the highest probability is 80%. The next is 70%, the next, right? So then you suddenly have a lot of value into, like, a lot of processing from the people who are doing them. And then you get, as an online sort of version of this, you get in real time answers from all these people, and then you can address how you, like, what's the path that your lesson plan takes based on their answers. So that was, to me, like a super interesting discovery. Speaking of using these as almost like as Hinge questions. I think Hinge question has this more precise definition, but the idea is that, like, as least as a compass question, right? Like, know where students are, and if you do a lot of the cognitive work before to understand what can you learn from the learner's answer, then you can do a lot with it. So that's we can figure out some examples for that too.